Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Agnes, and this is my final year project topic, Heroine or Hero, a study of local young adults' perceptions about the female identities and their roles. In the following time, I'm going to explain to you the reason why I've chosen this topic, how did I conduct my study, and what I found from my research. Last year on September, when Disney re-released their movie, The Little Mermaid again in 3D version, it has caused a lot of discussion on the internet, especially the comparison between Anderson's and Disney's version. And I found an interesting paper which was written by Trites. He has made a list of comparison, and the most attractive differences to me was how the role Ariel has changed. She has changed from a thoughtful, quiet, tough young woman into a rebellious, materialistic, weak girl. As I've always had a concern about the female identities, so I would like to have my final year project based on this topic. And I was wondering what would people around my age pick. And this is how I come up with these two research questions. First, I would like to know how would they respond to the two versions. Secondly, I would like to know what are the reflected perceptions of female roles and female identities from their responses. But before I start collecting the data, I must first understand how do perceptions form. And this is what I found. The cultural schema theory proposed by Nishida in 1999 has explained how people's behavior are guided by their past experience that are organized into knowledge. This kind of knowledge teaches what is wrong and what is right. In other words, schema is equal to our perceptions, and this kind of knowledge is stored in our brain. Later on, when we encounter in similar contexts, they will be triggered and applied. But since the information that our brain keeps is relatively large, so the process of applying schema is simplified automatically and unconsciously by our brain. That's why some of the scholars call it stereotyping. Totally, there are 7 types of schema, and my project was focusing on role schemas, which is the knowledge about how different genders should behave. After understanding how perceptions form, now I need to find a way to understand my participants' role schemas, since this kind of information is fake, not solid. And this is what I found: associative group analysis, so-called the AGA method. The special thing about this method is that it does not ask the participants' opinions directly. Instead, it gives a theme and asks them to write down the words that they can associate with within a limiting time. In other words, it looks like a simple word association test. The reason that we do not ask the participants' opinion directly is because Lauren said that when they are answering the question consciously, they will only give you the society standard instead of their own personal values. So in my questionnaires, among the 9 questions, only 4 of them are real, and I'll show you later after this methodology. In my study, I have invited 20 Hong Kong young adults aged 18 to 22 to participate and answer my questionnaires. In the questionnaires, I've set the theme as the comparison between Anderson's and Disney's version. However, instead of asking them to write down the words freely, I've provided them an adjective list, like this. Because most of them has English as their second or even third language, so ask them to write down the word in English might limit their expression. And since my questionnaire is kind of long, so I didn't ask them to finish it within a limited time. Totally, there are 9 questions in my questionnaire, but only these 4 are real. I set up different comparison area between the story and the movie to make them think that it was just a simple comparison between these 2 versions. And this is my first part of finding. This is the first question, where participants were asked to choose from the list to describe an ideal woman. Here's the result. As you might have noticed, the largest difference between the male and female participant is the dependency of women. The female participants think that women should be independent. Some of them even state that women should be brave and adventurous, while the male think that women should be dependent. On the second part of my findings, I picked two gender roles in the movies and the stories to compare and ask the participants which gender do you think would be fit with this role. This is the first one, the hero. In Anderson's version, Ariel was the hero who sacrificed herself, while in Disney's version, Prince was the hero who saved everybody else. Only 2% of the participants has chosen Ariel. His largest concern is not the gender, instead it's what have Ariel or the Prince done. And he thinks self-sacrificing is more hero-like, while the rest prefer the Prince. The reason is because they think that men should be the one who solve the problem and save the situation. Some of them even criticize the Prince in Anderson's version for being useless and not man enough. In the next question, I've asked them who should be the master at home. In Anderson's version, Grandma was the master, who was easy to cope with. She allowed the mermaids to go to the human world and explore more. While in Anderson's version, the father was the boss, who has set strict rules prohibiting them to go to the surface of the sea. Of course, most of the participants has chosen the grandmother because of her parenting style. However, the rest who have preferred the father is simply because it's a tradition and the norm for the father to be the master at home. This is the last part of my findings. I've asked the participants to pick their overall preferences and pick from the adjective list what do they think each version will influence the young woman. Here's the result. And this is the part that I think is the most interesting. Because when we compare this table to part one of the findings, we will see that what the female participants have picked actually match with their description of the ideal woman, same as the males. So I was expecting for the votes to be 50-50 for the Anderson's and Disney's version. In fact, over 19% of the participants has voted for Disney's, just because they think the gender role displayed in Anderson's version is not acceptable. They criticize the Ariel in Anderson's version for being too tough and too independent, while the Prince for being too useless. From the above information, we can see that even though most of the participants agree that ideal woman should be independent and brave, and that will have a better influence on the young woman, but the female participants prefer to be safe and protected by the males. And the male prefer the young lady to be dependent, thoughtful, and respectful, because independence has been the male's characteristic since the traditional Chinese culture. In the past, men were believed to be more independent and decisive, and therefore they were expected to make the decision. But in the part 2 of the findings, we can still see that males are still expected to be the decision maker at home and at the society. So to conclude, the local young adult schema are still affected greatly by the traditional Chinese culture. Even though the female participants agree that the modern female identity that is being independent has a better influence on the young lady, but they prefer to be reserved and dependent. And since Disney's version fits with the Hong Kong young adult schemas more, that is Ariel's behavior and her identity, are similar to what the young adult expects, and that's why it received more votes. The limitation of my project is that I don't have enough time, and the sample group size is not large enough, so it's not representative enough. Secondly, if I have more time to do it, I will use more than one story. I will make more comparisons for the participant to choose. And this is the end of my presentation. Thank you.